Recording. All right. Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Boyce. I'm the Director of Research and Education at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, and welcome to Science Hub. I don't have my own background music, so I got to make it up, I guess. So Science Hub, for those of you, this is your first time. Science Hub is hosted by the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, usually throughout the winter and the off season on Nantucket. During the stay-at-home orders, we decided to, bring more science and nature to the people where we're at, and we're all at home. So we decided to continue with our Science Hub and bringing more science content to everybody wherever you may be, not just on Nantucket. So that's the best thing about, Science Pub Online, is anyone can join in. So I am very excited about this month, and I'm forgetting a few things before I officially take it over or send it over to you. So for those of you who aren't familiar, because I know people are joining in from all over the place, the Linda Loring Nature Foundation is a land trust on Nantucket Island. We do research, education, and stewardship of our 275 acres. And Science Pub is a great example of one of the ways we bring science and nature to people. We connect people with science and nature wherever they're at, like I said. And so keep following us on Facebook, looking at our website, and becoming a member, and then you'll be able to get all the information about all our upcoming programs and ways that you can be involved. So for tonight, or this afternoon, Science Pub, we are in for a special treat. If you joined our Zooms before, we've had a lot of presentations, but we are going to have an actual field trip. We are out right now with Tobias Landberg. I'm very excited about. So if you have questions during the presentation, I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A. So just type in any comments or questions, and we're going to ask as we go along. So this is as interactive as you guys want it to be. So keep the questions coming, and we'll kind of throw everything we got at Tobias. And so for those of you who don't know, I'm recognizing some of the names on here that you may have met before. Dr. Tobias Landberg is the Director of Research at the Amphibian Foundation, which is in Georgia, and I can't remember what city it's in.
Atlanta.
And Tobias was also one of our keynote speakers at the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative Citizen Science Weekend. So he's come out to Nantucket, got to play around with reptiles and amphibians with us. And we go way back to graduate school. So yeah, so I'm just super excited to have Tobias here. I'm going to stop talking. Please keep typing in questions, and I am going to hide away and turn it over to Tobias. So let me I'm going to spotlight you. Okay. Spotlight you. Okay. Ooh. All right, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody who is joining us. As Sarah said, my name is Tobias, and I am the Director of Research at the Amphibian Foundation. I'm coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. We are at the Blue Heron Nature Preserve, where the Amphibian Foundation is headquartered. And this is the city park, and you can see there are people out enjoying the beautiful day. And we have seen a lot of activity here at the park. It's one of the places that you can still, go out and safely enjoy nature. And we love that. We love the support of everybody doing that. And vitamin D is good for you. So what I wanted to do today was kind of introduce you to what we do here at the Amphibian Foundation, and answer your questions, as many as you would like. And I thought we could get started by showing you some of the facilities that we have here. I'm at the Field Research Center, and this is a facility, an outdoor research and captive husbandry facility where we are raising a number of imperiled amphibian species. So these are animals that either are threatened legally or endangered federally, or in some way have major problems with their populations. And these are our high priority species at the Amphibian Foundation that we are trying to help preserve them and do conservation as well as education and outreach. So if you can see behind me and all around me, we have big, what are really cattle tanks that are repurposed for amphibian propagation and research. And all the ones around me right here are filled with water. And then there's a bunch over there. And these are some very unique triphasic mesocosm. So mesocosm means this is an intermediate level of habitat. It's not an aquarium in a lab where you could control all the conditions and the environment. And it's not a wild pond, but it is sort of intermediate. It holds 300 gallons at least, and it will have a lot of environmental effects, which is good for generating variation in these animals. We want them to experience natural fluctuations in light and temperature and food availability and all those things that make organisms respond and grow normally. But we can still protect them and control their environment to a certain degree here. So as you see, they have nets on them. Hopefully you can see that. And these nets will keep out predators. In these 10 tanks, we have Gopher Frog tadpoles. And what I'm gonna do while I'm talking is just undo one of these nets and uncover the tank. And you might be able to see Gopher Frog tadpoles swimming around and taking cover. There's a couple swimming right towards us here. So this is Georgia's rarest frog species. And what we've done is we are involved in a statewide effort to head start these animals in order to augment their population. So what that means is early in the season, in the winter, we will go out to the known wetlands where they occur. When the animals breed, they lay eggs in the water. We will collect some of those eggs and bring them back here and feed them and take care of them and do research on the species. And then once they reach metamorphosis and they metamorphose into fat, little chubby, happy froglets, we will take them back to their habitat and release them. And the reason why we do this is because larval and egg mortality is very high. You could have one snapping turtle come and eat an entire egg mass of 1,500 animals, and that would, be totally normal. But because there's so few breeding pairs left, because there's so few populations left in the state, that would have a dramatic negative effect on their population. So this is a Head Start program. We're working with lots of other institutions and organizations, including the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And I just before this got off a Zoom meeting, which was the task force of all the states that are working with gopher frogs, because they lack federal protection right now. And they are rapidly declining, and we don't want to wait for that kind of protection in order to save them. So I am going to dip net one of these things so that you can see it. So I'll just point this down and hopefully you can see. Oh, there he goes. Let's see. Oh man, they're fast. They've warmed up. Nope.
Can I ask a question while you're doing that, or you want to wait a sec?
No, go ahead.
So you were mentioning it's a Head Start. As a Head Start program, you release the adults back to where the location you collected the eggs. Do you ever do reintroductions or reintroductions to historic areas where they were extirpated?
Yes, we are. Hold on, I just have to use both hands for a second.
Sorry.
We are restoring wetlands, building artificial wetlands, and creating new ponds for them to breed in. So can you guys see a chubby little tadpole swimming around in here?
Yeah, how old or how long since it hatch date for that guy?
So that is a couple of months. They are growing relatively slowly up here in Atlanta because it's not nearly as warm as the habitat where they come from down on the coastal plain. So this tadpole is approximately 8 weeks old, and it has very small, you probably can't see it, I can just see the nubbin of a leg that is emerging. There's the body and then the tail, and right where it joins, there's a tiny little nubbin of a hind limb that is just forming. So this would be, still an early stage larva. Actually, it's relatively large. It's over 2 inches, but they do grow relatively quickly and large. But they still probably have another 6 or 8 weeks left before they reach metamorphosis. And I was actually just out yesterday. Today's Monday. Yeah, yesterday we went out into the field. My wife was my research assistant, Emily, and she helped me release some tadpoles because we had collected too many to grow them up to full size here in these cattle tanks, so we don't want to overcrowd them. And so in the beginning, they're small, they don't have too many competitive interactions, but at this point we wanted to reduce density, so we drove down and released head started tadpoles to a site in South Georgia that was 3 different artificially constructed wetlands, and they look beautiful down there. And we're just so happy to be able to contribute to their conservation. Is there any questions so far about gopher frogs or head starting, or I can also talk about some of the problems about why they are sort of in the situation that they're in.
Can I ask a quick question first before that? So about the Head Start program, questions were, how long has this program, the breeding program, been going on? And do you have an estimate of success rate of released individuals? Like how are they supplementing the population?
We have been, so I'm new to the project. I am just recently come to this position, so I don't have the deep history of these projects, but I know that the head starting that my boss was doing, Mark Mandica is our executive director, he has been doing them for at least 10 years. Unfortunately, populations have continued to decline, and it's really hard to monitor success. But that was one of the reasons why I came on to the Amphibian Foundation, was to devote more time and effort to these types of monitoring programs. So I was out there with a dip net and surveying the ponds before I did the releases. And we did find both gopher frogs and striped newts, which is another one of our high priority endemic species that share the same problems and habitat. So we have been working on it for at least 10 years. We don't know exactly how successful it is yet. We don't have hard data, but from that task force meeting that I was just on, I have, I have certainty that people are seeing success anecdotally, but the data are not hard. The data are a little soft. So I'm looking forward to actually doing consistent surveying and being able to capture those numbers a little better. Was there other questions?
That's all I have for right now, but just because some people came on since we started, if people that are on have questions, we're going to ask questions as we go. So if you type them in, I can continue to ask Tobias questions. So as we go along, feel free to keep shooting out the questions. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if you're going to get into this, but are there other species that you're doing or similar work with either Head Start or other types of breeding?
Yeah, so the other species that shares this habitat and some of these problems are the striped newt, and you guys would probably be familiar with the eastern red-spotted newt in Massachusetts. I don't know if it's on the island. I would imagine that it could get out there. If you guys have ever seen a red eft, it's a bright orange little terrestrial salamander that is highly toxic, very conspicuous because nothing can survive eating it, essentially. And so they just march around in broad daylight. The newts are semi-aquatic species, so the eggs are aquatic and the adults are aquatic, but there's typically a larval or a juvenile phase in between that is terrestrial. And that is the only group of salamanders that undergoes two metamorphoses. So it metamorphoses from an aquatic larva into the red eft stage, and then it metamorphoses again into an aquatic adult. So that's super cool. The striped newt is a coastal plains endemic, which means that it lives in the southeast United States, along in the coastal plain, and breeds in highly ephemeral habitat. Highly ephemeral means that there is water for a short period of time in depressions and basins, and then it typically will dry up to be bone dry in the summer. And so that is a very special type of habitat. That one of the reasons why amphibians do well in ephemeral wetlands is because that excludes permanent aquatic species like fishes, which love to eat amphibian larvae and eggs. And so ephemeral wetlands are a key habitat type for a lot of amphibians, especially the frogs and salamanders that we have. The other species that we have that is federally endangered is the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander. And the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander, it has been declining rapidly. There are very few populations left, and it's probably the most sensitive of the three species. I'll show you some signage we have here. This is what a frosted flatwood salamander looks like. Adorable. This is what a gopher frog looks like as an adult. You saw the tadpole there a second ago. And this is what a striped newt looks like as an adult. And in these tanks here, we have a lot of frosted flatwood salamanders. And this is the only captive assurance colony or breeding colony in the world for this species. We are the lead on the federal recovery task force for this species. And we have built these very special triphasic mesocosms. And so down at one end, there is water in a shallow pool. and then up here is the upland, and in between is an ecotone or a transitional habitat. And they require all of those habitats for their life history. They breed in actually dry basins before the rains come. They lay their eggs terrestrially. Then the winter rains come, the eggs hatch out and swim around as larvae for a couple months, and then metamorphose out and go up into the uplands and spend 98% of their lives buried underground. So it's a burrowing species. You know, so many people want to interact with them and see them here. And unfortunately, I have to tell them that unless you're here at night, in the rain, in winter, you're not going to see them come out because they spend their time burrowed underground. So we are trying to make them happy and breed them as part of the structured decision-making action plan of the task force, the federal task force. And when we are successful, and we have seen small signs of success, but we haven't gotten to actually breed them yet. When we do, we will be putting them in the hands of other institutions, because right now we harbor most of the individuals that are known of this species right here in Atlanta, and that's certainly true for one part of their range. It's a very disjunct range, and there's essentially one wetland in Georgia that still has them. They have been lost from probably South Carolina and other places. And so that one wetland that has them in Georgia may be represented by one female who has been laying eggs for a couple of years. When that wetland is drying down due to habitat changes, climate change, and other problems due to ecological succession and degradation of the habitat, we have gone in and salvaged some of those animals that otherwise would have died as larvae when the ponds dried up, brought them here, and are taking care of them. So this is a captive assurance colony that we are trying to assure that their survival and prevent them from going extinct. If something happened here, if there was a hurricane that, you know, broke and blew all these tanks away, we would lose a major chunk of the diversity of the species. So we want to distribute them to other organizations, conservation organizations, zoos, and things that will help in this effort. Ultimately, yeah.
So we have a question. It's a kind of a two-part question about conservation. So we have what kind of habitat conservation or reconstruction projects are happening on the coastal plain to give reintroductions a higher chance for success? Yeah. And then along with that is what entities are involved, like what other types of organizations might be involved in that effort?
Great questions. The particular problems that these animals all face is that they are sandhill and longleaf pine savanna endemics. And this particular type of habitat is dominated by fire. And over the last several hundred years, we've all grown up, well, not for hundreds of years, we've grown up with Smokey the Bear telling us that fire is bad, but we have been suppressing fire for a long time. And unfortunately, fire is good for this type of habitat. These animals need to breed in ephemeral wetlands that are open canopy and have a lot of grasses and herbaceous cover. They can't tolerate shade or accumulation of what we call duff, which is the organic matter. They breed almost directly in contact with the clay surface of the earth, and then there's just a little bit of leaf litter and herbaceous covered grasses. So this habitat, in order to remain and perpetuate, needs to burn every 2 to 3 years at the most. And it generally needs to burn in the hot lightning season when everything is dry and the basin is dry. We are managing this habitat, what's left of it, by typically having burn crews go out and do controlled burns. And the burn bosses don't like to burn in the summer because it's dangerous, and the fires are harder to control, and they can spread to adjacent places, and get out of control. So they typically burn in the winter, and in the winter is when there's water in these basins, and then they don't burn. If they don't burn, they start going through ecological succession, which means that the grasses give way to shrubs, and the give way to trees, and pretty soon the trees have sucked all the moisture out and shaded, and it's unsuitable habitat. And so being able to do controlled burns is a key part of the restoration of this species. It's not easy to do. It's expensive, it's dangerous, and a lot of people are against it. Burning in the winter is fine for the uplands. For 98% of the acreage, it works great. But that 2% is super critical to the diversity of the organisms and the functioning of the ecosystem. And it's not good. Winter burning is not good for the wetlands species. The other part of the equation is that the longleaf pine savannas have been developed, and we have lost over 90% of longleaf pine habitat in the last 20 years due to conversion to pulp and paper farms growing pines. They also harvest the pine needles for mulch and for housing developments and things like that. These habitats are highly desirable in being along the coast. They're very easy to turn into developments because the sandy soils, they're generally pretty flat. So it's a low cost of development, a high value to developers. So those are some of the main problems that we face with sort of mismanagement or bad management practices that have not been effective, and habitat loss. I'd say, and climate change is up in there as well. When the rains come, they often are at the wrong time of year, or they are not sufficient to fill those basins. So the second part of the question is, who is involved? Everybody, that I think you would want to be involved, from private, nonprofit, to public agencies. You have, like I mentioned, for the Frosted Flatwoods Salamander, we have the federal government. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife is the top level organization that controls and manages that, but it also involves state organizations. Only a few states where they occur: Georgia, Florida, possibly Alabama, South Carolina. They are involved, but they have been probably extirpated from that area. But we try to keep as many people in the loop and doing restoration as we can. There's also a lot of private conservation organizations and private zoos. So I went down a couple months ago, and we had striped newts that we actually rear indoors in our headquarters facility. And we have been producing baby newts and raising them up. And once they're big enough to be released, I drove them down to Florida, to Apalachicola National Forest, and together with, gosh, so many organizations, we released them after marking them with elastomers, so we could tell exactly which year they were released and what their genetic lineage was. So that was the Coastal Plains Institute, a private nonprofit devoted to the coastal plains restoration and striped newts specifically. We also met with people from the Jacksonville Zoo who were raising animals in the zoo as part of their conservation mission. People from Detroit Zoo were there. People from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and various state agencies, as well as we were representing the Amphibian Foundation. So there are those components of the project where we have different people that are breeding them and bringing them down as part of their conservation mission. And then there are the local people who are managing the habitat. The Oriane Society is a local nonprofit down here. The Nature Conservancy, these are some of the organizations that have burn crews and are sending out those. There's also opportunities for the public to get involved. For example, those ponds where we released striped newts, they had been dug out, had all the top soil and cover excavated with machinery carefully placed, numbered, and then they put in a plastic liner, brought exactly back all the pieces, and you couldn't tell apparently within about 4 months that it had been disturbed at all because how carefully they did that. But the plastic pond liner helps hold water. And then they dug fences around the entirety of these ponds, and these are metal flashing that go into the ground, and every so often there's a plastic bucket buried in the ground. And every morning people from the Coastal Plains Institute and their volunteers go out and check these buckets for striped newts, and there's buckets on the inside and on the outside. So if the newt is in the inside, that means it was trying to get out and they crossed it over and let it go. And if it was on the outside, it was trying to come in. And so those are managed for 7 months out of the year, every single day, with volunteers and professional staff from these nonprofits.
We have a few additional questions, Tobias.
Great.
So one is, for the salamanders that you're rearing, how and what do you feed the adult salamanders?
Ooh, good question. We have been really fortunate to transplant the native plants from where these things occur naturally into these tanks, and they are doing well. We do spend some time weeding them. I can see some grasses poking up out of this one. This needs to be weeded back a little bit. And so that helps maintain the insect diversity. And so these are naturally colonized by all sorts of creepy crawlies, worms, bugs, and invertebrate prey that the salamanders will eat. We do supplement them and put in a little bit of small crickets every once in a while. And that's just to make extra sure, because it is a somewhat isolated tank, that they are growing and happy. But primarily it is from the sort of naturally occurring worms and invertebrates that we brought with the plants when we started these. They are little ecosystems that are almost self-sustaining.
Great.
Was that all?
There's 2 more questions now. Sorry, they keep coming in. So I'm going to take these out of order because one is a little bit more pertinent to what you just talked about. I'm a part of the burn crew, so I understand the difficulty in conducting summer burns. Has there been any research into alternative management methods like grazing, mowing, or rototilling that may prove effective in protecting the early successional habitats that the amphibians need if summer burning isn't feasible? So this is a very Nantucket question because we do a lot of prescribed fire here. Similar
Awesome.
early successional habitats, burned in the summer, all the same stuff.
Well, thank you for your work in trying to protect biodiversity and ensure we have these interesting and important species for the future. I really appreciate that. And we were just talking about this in this task force meeting that I just left. There's not a lot of options for the low cover. The bigger problem seems to be that some of these habitats have been neglected for decades, and you get these really tall canopy trees. So a lot of the work is going into 2 main ways to restore the habitat for the canopy trees, the longleaf pines in particular. And that is either girdling, which is cutting around the bark and cambium of the tree and letting it stand. And that is a relatively low cost method of killing the tree. Eventually it will fall, and that is okay, except it adds a lot to the organic layer, and it still can produce some shade. And so the alternative to that is actually cutting and dragging out every single big tree. And it's much more expensive, and we have very limited resources in terms of financial resources and manpower. And so we're trying to figure out through this task force what is the best use of our time and the limited resources that we have. I guess there are some super devoted people that go in by hand, macheting and chopping in some super critical habitat for the last known individuals of these really tiny population of frosted flatwoods. But it is brutal work. It is it's the last stopgap effort, and it's not really scalable. And so it and it's honestly it's just depressing work to do for some of these people. Burnout is a real problem for some of the people doing this type of work. So education seems getting the burn bosses on board, having the right weather conditions, having the administrators approve stuff. These are some of the ways that we are trying to get out that message and get it done right. And we're definitely having success with that. I mean, people want to do it right, but it's about minimizing that risk to human life and obviously our dwellings and those kinds of things.
Can I ask another question, switching gears a little bit?
Yeah.
So this question is about something I really wanted you to talk about too. So do you work with undergraduate and graduate students, and how are you involving them in your research?
Awesome. I love mentoring, and it was kind of my favorite part of being a professor. I personally, wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the mentors who gave me opportunities. And it's super satisfying. one of the reasons why I came to the Amphibian Foundation, aside from being able to devote my life and career to saving species, is because I wanted to start a new program, and we've called it the Bridge Program for Conservation Research. And this program is designed to get people opportunities to do research in a mentored environment, and get all the benefits of doing research, but outside of a traditional academic situation. My problem being a professor was I wanted to work with all the students. My favorite students were the C students, the students that came in to my comparative anatomy class and got an F on the first exam and fought and struggled and learned. And by the time that they left, they were getting an A on the final exam. Unfortunately, you end up with a C average. And these are the best students, the ones who learned the most in my class. And the system just wasn't set up to allow me to mentor so many students in such a diverse group of backgrounds and needs. And I kept talking to different people at different nature organizations and schools. And I said I wanted to kind of do a gap year kind of thing, where we gave people opportunities to do research, because everyone benefits. When you get into research, you learn so much and it takes off. It helps your academics, it helps, social development, it helps so many different parts of the equation. But nobody was doing it. And everybody says, oh, we love it, that's great, but we don't do that. And so eventually I said, I'll do it myself. And I happen to have a friend from undergrad who was the executive director and had started this and wanted me on board. And so the way that I work with different types and groups and populations of people is that any adult can be in this bridge program. If you apply and it's a good fit, the students will pay to be in the program. It's a residential program here in Atlanta, and we have had people move. Our first student moved from Wisconsin. Our second student, who is just starting, is coming from California. And they are going to stay for various amounts of time, either full-time or part-time. We have different options. You could be before college, kind of like gap year, where students might not be ready to start right out of high school to go into college. I think there's a big population right now who are dissatisfied and deferring their college entrance. And so they want to do something else, but it's not necessarily traditional gap year, that they just want to travel or do those kinds of things. But you can actually explore a career here and gain a lot of skills and get a lot of experience and do a lot of growing in a program that's tailored to their specific needs and goals, and includes transition services where we help people find the right kinds of jobs or programs, help them build their resumes and write cover letters, and how to do research. And we focus a lot on communication in all its forms: verbal communication, written communication. We do social media, and conservation is done with people more than it's done even with animals or plants. So communication is a main focus. And it could be for people who are in college who want to take a break, or it's during their summer and didn't have a research opportunity at their home base. In the fall, I'm going to have someone starting who has been out of college for 20 years. She has a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old set of kids, and has been in a career that wasn't fulfilling to her, and she wants to get into conservation and actually wants to design gardening classes for people who want to garden in such a way that it promotes biodiversity and habitat for amphibians and reptiles. And I'm going to help her design a curriculum, so at the end of the program she'll actually have a course to teach. And it could be for people who are fresh out of college that are looking to get into graduate school or into entry-level positions. So I am combining my favorite things, education, outreach, and research, and putting them into this package. And it's a unique program, so it takes a lot of education to get people to sort of understand what it's about. But it is, I think, direly needed, because there's not that many avenues for a lot of people, and a lot of people aren't well prepared, or even know what their interests are, or might not be culturally acceptable, or the school systems have failed. I mean, there's so many ways that you could have missed the boat, and so it's my goal to help those people individually get experience and get skills. So
so Tobias, I really love where you're coming from that, because I totally agree about everything you're saying about giving people research opportunities. I'm curious, how do you get your candidates if they're, a lot of times they're people, as you said, that either not fell through the cracks, but maybe missed, tradition, like maybe more traditional research opportunities, or, are older and kind of, looking for a career change. So how do you reach out to those individuals?
We have had applicants to the program from Nepal, India, from South America, from Argentina, from all over the country, as well as locally from the Atlanta area here in Georgia. And it has been, I guess, a combination of social media. So the Amphibian Foundation has a really broad network of supporters that follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And we have been, had a campaign to put out the word on those platforms. And if you like pictures of critters and seeing what we're doing and want to support us, obviously you should follow our social media. We're easy to find, Amphibian Foundation. I've also reached out to academics. We have done some, flyers and things and PowerPoint slides that people that I know, either in the local area or from my academic background and network, sent out to that. And then I did some talks at conservation types of conferences. So an integrative conservation conference here in Georgia a couple months ago, and the Partnership for Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, the Southeast chapter, I gave talks. And actually, as a result of COVID, I had a friend who was teaching a wildlife biology class, and all her students, she was at the University of San Diego, all her students went home, and they scattered to Washington and Colorado and whatever, and all her field trips got canceled. And so she did what we're doing now. She Zoomed me into her class, and I showed them the tanks, and I caught salamanders in the creek. And I think I caught a snapping turtle right out of the mud. And one of those students has gone on to get inspired about what we do, and is arriving in about a week and a half. If you guys have any ideas on how I can get the word out, Sarah, or anyone else, I would certainly love to hear it, because this is a new program, and I'm not a marketing person. I just play one on Zoom.
I think that's true for all of us at small conservation organizations. We all do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So Tobias, we probably have like, about 5 to 10 minutes,
Yeah.
because we want to be done before 5. So is there anything else that you want us to know about the program, about what you're doing at the Amphibian Foundation, that you want to make sure we know before we sign off?
Sure. I guess one of the things, that is very timely right now is how we've been affected by the global pandemic. I think we've all been affected to a greater or lesser degree. And one of the ways that we at the Amphibian Foundation and probably at Linda Loring have been affected is that we rely on events, public events, in order to do outreach, and all of that got canceled. So that is a major source of revenue and of PR that we have lost due to the pandemic. There are other things, like we have a lot of programming for kids. Our critter camps were one of the ways that we generated a lot, most of our revenue, in fact, that drives all this conservation research. And our critter camps for ages 6 to 14 got canceled for the summer, and so that source of revenue was gone. We're in the process of revamping it to be an online camp, but this is all new, and we're adapting. So I think that's another one of those lessons about being a small nonprofit conservation organization, is that you have to adapt and figure out solutions, and sometimes work on shoestring budgets. Our ability to do field work has been almost ground to a halt, because I can't take my students and put them in a car and drive with them for 7 hours to go to a field site, because we'd all be breathing the same air, and you can't socially distance. So what I've done here is I have actually gone local and created a new research program for the bridge program. And that involves a local creek here. We are doing a cleanup of the creek, and we are collecting all the litter and trash in the creek, and we have sorted and counted every piece of trash, classified it, categorized it, and turned it into data. And we are going to do repeated surveys to see where's this trash coming from, and what are the possible sources, and how can we educate people about stream health. And at the same time, we have been doing amphibian and reptile surveys in order to understand what's the relationship between the animals that live here and the stream health. And we can keep doing our socially distant protocol while we work in the field. And so this is one of the ways that that I've adapted. I'd be curious to hear about how others have adapted, but I thought you guys might want to hear that because it is kind of timely. And then I'll just show you our little creek here.
Nice. I think that's great. I think a lot of us, like we mentioned when we first signed on, was a lot of the different conservation organizations here, including the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, are kind of pivoting. We keep using that word because we maybe can't do the thing we plan to do, whether it's the research, the field work, or having all the volunteers, or the summer programming with kids and public. But there are things we still can do, and so we're trying to put that positive spin on it, but also be there for the community in terms of providing content and things to do, but then also kind of take that person power that's already in the field, like you're saying with the stream cleanup. Maybe kind of taking, people are out and about, people are exploring ways they haven't before because they maybe have time because they're not working. And so I know there's that negative component, but putting that positive like component to get your message out, I think is really, because people's ears are open more, it seems.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to see how this park is getting used more and more every day. I do a lot of interactions with people and tell them about you know, the work that we're doing here, and the most common response I get is, "Oh, this place is so great. I've lived here for, you know, however many years and never knew that this was here, and it's so wonderful." And we really appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's just it's been inspiring, and doing service feels really great right now. Working with the community and doing something that everybody really appreciates has just been a blessing for me, and I think it's been wonderful for my students to have that, you know, those selfless acts get reflected back to them so positively from the community. I think it, you know, it helps them grow, it helps them feel good, and they're doing good and learning science at the same time.
Awesome. I think we are going to have to wrap it up.
Okay.
And first, I want to thank you so much, Tobias, for joining us today and taking us around your mesocosms and showing us Gopher Frog tadpoles. I almost said salamanders. And, you know, really hearing about the breeding program. And it's really interesting, again, to hear about, I don't think of prescribed fire and salamander habitat as necessarily going together in my experiences. And so hearing that some of the conservation efforts and issues are just the same as that we're having on the island with seasonality of prescribed fires, early successional habitats, and with different, you know, end goals, but a lot of the, you know, public outreach issues and conservation aspects are the same. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Great to talk to you as well.
Yeah, great to talk to you. And I have to say, the Amphibian Foundation has an awesome logo.
Thank you.
I was putting something together and Charlie, my son, saw it and he's like, "That's really cool. What is that?" I'm like, "Oh, that's an amphibian."
My boss, the executive director, happens to also be a scientific illustrator. So we love art as much as we love science here and conservation.
I think that's, you know, just for those in the audience, the first day that I met Tobias was my first weekend at the University of Connecticut as a graduate student. And we were at a grad student party and he had a t-shirt that was a picture of a spotted turtle. And I was like, "I need to know you right now." And you were like, "I made this t-shirt." So conservation and art always go together. So that's another way we can connect people with what we're doing too.
Agreed. There's so many ways, and I love the fact that we're connecting right here with our ideas, and it's been a pleasure to chat with everybody out there. I hope you guys are staying safe, and I hope you do good things and connect with your community and support your local conservation organizations.
Awesome. Thank you, Tobias. And just so anybody who's on wants to know, if you want to hear more about the Amphibian Foundation, you know, obviously go to Amphibian Foundation. You can reach out to Tobias if you have additional questions, and you can email me too, and I can pass them along. And the last thing I want to say before we totally end this is, for those of you who are still interested in additional science pubs, in 2 weeks, instead of having a science pub, we are one of the sponsors for the Nantucket Book Festival, which has gone online also. So our featured speaker that the Linda Laurie Nature Foundation is sponsoring is David Wallace Wells from New York Magazine, and he's going to be talking about his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. And so we're really excited to sponsor his virtual visit. I was gonna say visit, it's a virtual visit. So that'll be the week of May 25th. And so just keep an eye out at the Linda Laurie Nature Foundation Facebook page or our website for more information about exactly when the talk is. So thanks, Tobias, so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we will talk again soon.
All right. It's been a
All right.
pleasure. Thanks, you all.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for being here tonight.